where we engage in monthly conversations that are important to community. And we would certainly like to spotlight our New Yorkers for New York campaign before we get started with our conversation. And so I'm going to ask my colleague Dee to cue up the video and play it so you can learn more about our New Yorkers for New York campaign. And then we will move straight away into our conversation.
Distribution, and it's about awareness. My theory was and still is that a food secure NYC begins with a food secure nation. And then that food security will filter out. Everything starts with what is on your plate is a form of destiny. Rates of high school diplomas, career earnings, the number of life outcomes, incarceration rates. One of my pitches when I'm trying to partner with the NYPD is a 1% rise of food insecurity has been linked repeatedly with a 12% rise in violent crime. So by reducing food insecurity, we can reduce violent crime.
Without question, people are aware of it, but people don't know how to resolve it, and not everybody's exposed to it. So it's a talk at one level, but they don't see it. And sometimes when you see it, you have a much better appreciation. Reading a Miss James puts it in a whole different, seeing the Frigidaire outside, people don't see that in many communities. So when you come to the communities that are underserved and need help, you get a much more understanding of the people and the need, and that's critical. That's what Citizens is so unique, because we work at the community level, at the small levels, with people like yourself. We're a one-man show at the moment. Miss James is a one-lady show. But that's what makes a difference in the city, that one individual can really make a difference.
So, Doug, you've done a really, really amazing job, and I'm so impressed about everything you've done. But you probably don't know, Citizens Committee is actually honoring you this year.
And making a micro grant for you of $3,000.
Oh, thank you.
It's our pleasure.
Thank you.
Thank you for having us.
No.
This wasn't about Andrew and I. This is about you and what you've accomplished.
Thank you. Wow.
So the honor is yours.
What inspires you to do so much for New York and to use so much of your time and resources and expertise for Citizens Committee and beyond?
We raised our kids in New York. New York is New York. When it needs something, you do what you can do.
New York is our home. It's our life. It's the best city in the whole world. It has vibrance that nobody can beat. It evolves. It changes. We went through a pandemic. They said when we come back, we're coming back. So this city is about helping people, and people help people. And we're just part of a small group that does what we can do as best as we can do it. And together we're on 9 charity boards. So to us, this is critical. Your actions have a cascade effect. Many people realize the impact one has on another, and I think that's not changing, no matter what the labor markets are. Doing the right thing, I think we'll see more and more people doing that.
All right, so that is our New Yorkers for New York campaign. And as a New Yorker, you are certainly able to participate. Now, moving into our discussion, I'm Dr. Leslie Branch. I am the Director for Community Relations at Citizens Committee for New York City, and we are joined today by Mr. Wayne Ho, President and CEO of the Chinese American Planning Council. And we're going to hear, among other things, an overview of New York City's AAPI community, the impact of COVID on the AAPI community, and anti-Asian hate in the US, and what are some things that public agencies and communities can do to secure their safety. And so, having introduced Mr. Wayne Ho, I now transition to him to begin our discussion. So welcome to you, Mr. Ho. Thank you for joining us today.
Well, thank you for the invitation. I'm really excited to be here and to join all my friends here at Citizens Committee for NYC, as well as thank you everyone for joining us. Just as background, I am, as Leslie said, the president and CEO of the Chinese American Planning Council, CPC. We were founded in 1965 during the Civil Rights Movement, immigration reform, and we've now grown over 57 years to become the largest Asian American social services nonprofit in the country. We serve individuals of all backgrounds and ages, and in a given year, we usually serve 60,000 New Yorkers, 2/3 of whom are Asian American, mostly Chinese. The other third are Black, Brown, other immigrant, and low-income New Yorkers. Last year, due to the pandemic, the health, economic, and hate issues that our community members have faced, we served twice as many New Yorkers. 125,000 New Yorkers came through the doors of CPC in the last year. And it's staggering to see that the demand continues to rise in us trying to not just provide what has been our core services, but the new services that we are now providing to address everything from anti-Asian hate to the economic recovery to ensuring the public health of our community members. So I'm delighted to be here to talk more about the AAPI community of New York City, what CPC is doing, and of course, an issue that a lot of people are keeping an eye on, which is AAPI hate.
Thank you for that. So, it's interesting because there is this myth, if you will, the minority model myth, and there are some groups that are held up as the model minority, Asian Americans among that group, and talk to us about that myth and the implications of it in terms of services that might not be or might be available to Asians in general and to the Chinese community in particular.
So the Asian American community of New York City, it is the fastest growing racial group. So we are now 18% of the city of New York. We are made up of over 40 ethnic groups, so Chinese, Korean, Indian, Bangladeshi, Vietnamese, Filipino, etc., and over 200 languages and dialects. About 40% of all Asian Americans in New York are Chinese American, and Chinese are diverse ourselves in terms of ethnicity, in terms of language, dialects, etc. And we live across the 5 boroughs. While we are the fastest growing racial group, unfortunately, and make up 18% of the city, unfortunately, we get less than 1% of social services contract dollars from the city. We get less than 0.25% of philanthropic dollars from foundations and corporations, which means then that the fastest growing racial group in New York are not getting their needs met, because we do need these resources to provide social services, from daycare to after school programs, job training programs, senior programming. And at a time when the needs have increased in the community, we need to address those more. So in Michael Bloomberg, when he was mayor, he started the Center for Economic Opportunity, and they recalculated the poverty measure. Instead of using the bucket of goods for the federal poverty measure, they did their own local measure, and taking into account cost of living, specifically in New York City. The Asian American community went from the least poor racial group compared to whites, Blacks, and Latinx communities to the poorest racial group once we did the adjustments according to the city of New York. And right now, about 1 out of every 4 Asian Americans struggles with poverty. That's across the entire Asian American community. In the Chinese American community, it's about 1/3 of seniors struggle with poverty. About 1 out of every 5 child is born into poverty. So it varies across ethnic groups. But what this means then is, with a highly immigrant community that might not speak English, that has high naturalization rates, there still continues to be barriers to services. And that's why organizations like CPC becomes very important to the Chinese American community, just like South Asian Council for Social Services becomes important to the diverse South Asian community, because we are the trusted folks that hire from the community and provide services directly to our community members.
So that's a very interesting statistic, and framing matters, what you just pointed out. And there's something to be said for needing to update that poverty line measure. I don't recall when it was created, but it is woefully outdated, particularly since inflation, since wages have not kept pace with inflation since, I think, 1972. So there are probably more people who are living at or beneath the poverty line, and they just don't realize it, or maybe they do realize it, but paper doesn't acknowledge it. So I would love to, see the link to that study. So, just thinking about things that are happening present day and really linked to the beginning of COVID. We've seen an uptick in violence against Black and Brown communities and communities that are not part of the dominant group. So how would you respond to what public safety is?
So I think it's very important for us to define public safety. And to many of us in the Asian American community, public safety is not the absence of violence. It should be the presence of wellness in the community. And while we have seen in the news more coverage around anti-AAPI hate, the reality is violence against Asian American bodies have existed for all the 200 years that we've been in this country. From Chinese immigrants going to California to work in the mines, or mining to look for gold, to Japanese Americans and Korean Americans who are working on the farms on the West Coast, to American violence in Southeast Asia, that we have seen violence against Asian Americans throughout history. We are we're recognizing the 40th anniversary of the murder of Vincent Chin by out-of-work Detroit auto workers, where Vincent Chin's a Chinese American man and who was killed because there was a belief that Japanese automobiles in the early 80s were affecting the job opportunities of Detroit auto workers, and they thought he was Japanese and targeted him. And we fast forward to in the last couple of years when COVID started, we had a president who was using terms like Kung flu, China virus, which these ideas of perpetuating the foreignness or the otherness of the Asian American community has really defined our existence. You just asked about the model minority stereotype, which says that all Asian Americans do well, we work hard, we go to the greatest schools, we get the greatest jobs, which when I shared some of the poverty statistics, it's not true. The other stereotype that we face is the perpetual foreigner stereotype. Yes, we're a highly immigrant community, but we also have deep roots in the United States over 4 or 5 generations. But I can't tell you how many times someone has come to me and said, "Where are you from?" California. "Where are you really from?" Or "You speak English well." And these are the stereotypes that the Asian American community continues to be not an American. And that's why when we talk about safety, it becomes really important for us to make sure, how do we not just have safety, but we also need belonging? Because for the Asian American community, it's not just about not having violence against us, but it's also about how is it that American culture, American society, our neighbors and residents of the city recognize that we are also part of the fabric of the United States and of New York City.
So, you said a word, you said a lot of words, but one word that just really resonated with me is the word belonging, right? And so as a rhetorical critic who engages in critical discourse analysis, words really matter. And so the word belonging, particularly in, I guess, American history, could be loaded, right? So people who look like you and I belonged, but the way that belonging was framed was in property, right? Either chattel property or slavery. So I would be interested in knowing, given what the work of your organization does, how would you push back or frame in such a way the word belonging to not have it trigger in somebody's mind something negative, as in, you belong to me, or just, thinking about a speech that the, former president, who used such derogative and derisive terms, he referred to an African-American in the crowd at a rally he was doing as my African-American, right? So talk to me about belonging.
Yeah, thanks for the question. I think that's where you're actually the first person to raise for us the sense of belonging in terms of a possession, because obviously that's not the connotation that we want, especially since many of us who do diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging work talk about how people feel part of a community. So I think that's a good flag for us to consider the language we use. And to your point, which is, what's the language that works for every community that's out there too? But I think the sense of belonging that we want is, for an example, right now, when there's this sense of fear and hate going on in the community, and there's a lot of concerns where we had seniors who did not want to leave our residential buildings or our senior centers to go get vaccinated when the vaccine was available, to Asian American students who did not want to go back to school, or their parents didn't want to them to go back to school because they were afraid not of catching COVID, but they were afraid of catching a fist to their face because of anti-Asian hate. That the sense of belonging we wanted to promote was, it's not about trying to other communities. It's not about targeting other communities, because let's be clear, Chinatown, while it's predominantly Chinese, there are Black, brown, and other communities who live in Chinatown. And even generations ago, there were in that neighborhood, there were other communities. So we need to embrace all communities. So instead of having escorts or the guardian angels come into Chinatown, or more police come into Chinatown, that's where there were a lot of local groups who started more neighborhood strolls and how to have more people on the street. Because as we hear from many people, there's more, when New York is open, people feel safe around New York City because there's more people on the streets, there's more people on the subway, there's more people out at night, there's more people in the businesses and restaurants, etc. And I think that's what we want to promote, is that promoting safety for the Asian American community doesn't mean we perpetuate what others have done to us, which is treat them like the other. So I appreciate you asking that question.
Well, sure thing, and so some of the things that communities can do, or community strolls and just being out more. Are there other things, other different kinds of solutions to address not only or not only Asian hate, but we saw the tragic thing that happened in Buffalo, and at some points, thoughts and prayers, though they are welcome, they don't stop it. So how do we get at the root of this?
Right, and I think that's where we have to look at the systemic violence that does happen to the bodies of people of color, to women, to LGBTQ groups. And I appreciate you raising what happened in Buffalo. The next day, out in Southern California, there was a shooting in a predominantly Taiwanese church. And the anti-Asian hate since the pandemic has started has increased by over 350% across the United States. In New York City alone, as 2022 has started, there's already been, I believe, over 130, 140 reports of hate crimes against the Asian American community. And to be clear, these reports are just the ones that are reported to the NYPD. And these are the ones that can be classified as hate crimes because there is a legal standard on what is a hate crime. So that does not count for underreports. That doesn't account for microaggressions. It doesn't account for spitting or people throwing things at people, but not saying a racial slur when they do it. But we need to recognize that violence manifests itself in different ways in the community. And sometimes it's interpersonal, where we might have white supremacists against Black individuals. We also need to recognize that relationships with NYPD is complicated, not just for the Black and brown communities, but for Asian American communities. We have to remind ourselves that 2 years ago, when the pandemic started, there was the movement for Black lives that was reinvigorated, and we were helping to mobilize AAPIs for Black lives. Mm-hmm. And I've been heartened that as we've seen the rise in anti-Asian violence, or the knowledge of anti-Asian violence, that Black and brown leaders are standing for us too. But I don't think it gets reported as much in the news that there are allies there. But we need to recognize that it's a complicated relationship that the Asian American community has with the police. South Asian, Muslim, and Arab Americans were monitored by the NYPD, partnering with ICE, and led to deportations. There are police targeting Asian American women who might work in massage parlors, whether or not they're sex workers or not, that they've been targeted. And there was a death of a Chinese American woman in Flushing a couple of years ago because NYPD raided her work. We also need to recognize that the targeting of Asian American communities by NYPD or other officials does lead to a lot of fears for immigrants, and especially undocumented immigrants. So many of us are looking at what are the solutions. And yes, police do play a role in public safety, but we also need to recognize that not all violence against Asian Americans might be racially targeted. Yes, some of it is racially targeted. It's probably perpetuated by the president and what folks see in the news. But if there's folks who have mental health issues, or people who are homeless, sometimes it might get escalated into violence against Asian Americans, and especially against Asian American women and seniors, which we do have to talk about. Why is it that the vulnerable amongst the Asian American community are targeted? But other solutions are when we have a $6 billion budget for the NYPD, but we have less than a $4 billion budget in the city of New York to address housing, homelessness, health issues, senior centers, education programs, job training programs, et cetera, that we need to really look at what investments the city, the state, and the federal government are making towards services as opposed to over policing. Because I think we all do want the same thing. We think that every New Yorker should be healthy, housed, educated, employed, and safe.
So, that was a great mouthful. And what it has done is brought me back to how the myth of the Asian model minority hurts Asian communities, and anyone to whom that false myth is applied, because not everyone is, as you said, going to the Harvards and the Yales. Not all of them are math or chemistry geniuses. Some of them do have serious mental and other health issues. And it is unfortunate that mental health is criminalized. What I am heartened about by our conversation today is the work that CitizensNYC does in community. So where there are gaps in resources from public agencies, I'm so grateful for the grassroots resident-led groups who, are living in community, who are experiencing some of the quality of life issues, who are stepping up every day to address them and working to improve the quality of life. And we are so grateful, to partner with organizations such as yours, and, the ability to be able to fund in even a small way groups that are doing some of this really important work that, federal, what do you call it, public agencies at either the federal, the state, or the local level just aren't really doing enough to put resources behind. So another question for you, and this was interesting. You mentioned police and the Asian community. Being a Black woman, I just know from community that, a Black man walking down the street at night, maybe coming home from work or whatever, being followed by a police car, may not feel that safe, right? Just because of the history and the lived experience. Is that the same? Have you learned from any of your studies or information? Is that the same, or are there similar sentiments in some Asian communities? Just curious.
I think it really varies. There are folks in our communities, which as diverse as it is, who might have immigrated or been refugees who've come to the United States from Asian countries, and they've had left totalitarian regimes where the state police were taking away family members and may have assassinated family members, and they've escaped to this country. So there's a lot of distrust in authoritative government and military or the police. There's others who have been victims of crimes, not just hate crimes, but have been victims of other crimes, and feel that police do give them a sense of safety. So I think it's a very complicated relationship, from Southeast Asian refugees to fourth generation Chinese to women who might be survivors of domestic violence. And obviously the police play a role in how to promote safety when there might be domestic violence or child abuse cases, and how they respond to those issues. But that's where we do feel that the police do play a role in public safety. But if there's family members with mental health issues, or if there's homeless individuals, or if there's children or young people that are having issues with their parents or others, that at times it might not be a police officer that can solve the issue. And police officers might not be trained to solve those issues. And that's where we need more solutions, like community-based solutions, like violence interrupters, and more social workers, and more home visits, and more nursing programs, that these can get to some of the issues that communities are facing, which police officers might be unfairly set up to fail to address these issues. And unfortunately, too many times, we're seeing Black and brown bodies as the victims when there are mental health issues or family issues or home issues inside the home. And I think that's where we need to see some of these investments in services, not in over policing. So for example, we want to promote the safety of our community, and that's where we've been fortunate to raise private funding in order for us to do self-defense classes with our staff and with our community members. We've been able to bring in allies and partners like Hollaback and Center for Anti-Violence Education and Womankind to do trainings with staff and community members around being an upstander. We've also partnered with NYPD, the Mayor's Office for the Prevention of Hate Crimes, the different district attorneys' offices on what is a hate crime, how do you report, what are your rights when these incidents do happen, because we do want to make sure the community is reporting these incidents. And then we have to figure out what's the right solution. And that's where we've also been promoting restorative justice practices. And I know there's certain ways of having transformative justice and restorative justice where both parties do have empathy and want to find a solution. But that's what we've been promoting, because once again, 2 years ago, we were marching saying that the police is not always the solution, and we're marching to support Black lives that obviously have been impacted by police violence. So I know, while in a time of fear, let's not lose what we were critical about during those movements and remind ourselves that if a hate crime happens or if violence happens, do we want to criminalize other communities, or do we want to find restorative and transformative processes where we can heal as a community, and then where we can then have more justice across communities so we don't continue to perpetuate the inequities that we have in society, especially racially?
So, that's definitely a great point. I'm actually doing a restorative justice program now, and a lot of the restorative justice practices originate with BIPOC communities, BIPOC people, Indigenous folks. And so it will be, it's in its nascent movement, but hopefully there is a hunger for it because the systems that we have now do not foster accountability. And to the extent that there is accountability, it's usually the victim of some sort of harmful act, blaming themselves for why they were harmed. And that is just twisted. So any final comments before we open it up to Q&A from our audience members?
I do want to acknowledge that I think that if there's a silver lining in what's been happening, is that there is more knowledge of the violence that has happened against and hate crimes against the Asian American community, and that that decision makers and allies are trying to figure out what a solution is. And I think you mentioned in your remarks, which is that we did see a lot of grassroots neighborhood mutual aid groups and others come together. And I think that's what's actually been really heartening, is that when we have Black leaders and brown leaders and legislators say that there must be a stop to violence and hate crimes. We had all the candidates for mayor spoke out against the violence that was happening. I talked about the funding inequities that face our communities, so that we need these resources to provide culturally competent and language accessible and immigrant accessible services, that CPC, working with other organizations like Coalition for Asian American Children and Families and Korean American Family Support Center, that we were able to get $10 million in the state budget, which just got doubled to $20 million in the state budget, and then $4 million in the city council budget last year to address anti-Asian hate, as well as the public health and the economic recovery of our communities. And this money will be distributed to 80 plus Asian American organizations, including CPC. And I think that's where there's more attention to this. When we've had the unfortunate incidents with the murder of Michelle Litzigo and Christina Yuna Lee, I do want to give a shout out to Mayor Adams and Police Commissioner Sewell, because a couple hours after those murders, we got text messages and emails about getting into a conference call with legislators and allies and community leaders to talk about what happened, to learn the facts that we knew at that case, and make sure we have a united front and united messaging to educate New Yorkers about what's going on. Because once again, we want to stop anti-Asian hate, but we do not want to perpetuate any divisions with other communities. So I do want to acknowledge that I think there has been progress, but I do think that the largest issue is there's still a lot of fear, anxiety, concerns, and anger in the Asian American community. And we really need all the city to come together to address this, because violence and hate's not new. We've seen the rise in anti-Semitic incidents. We continue to see anti-Black and anti-Brown incidents, and we need to find solutions to address all the violence that's been happening.
For sure. And so thank you for engaging with me in a dialogue. We're going to have about 10 minutes of Q&A from the audience. And then after that, we'll move into breakout rooms where groups can chat among themselves. And, we'll have some question prompts that we will put up and then rejoin in the main room to share around. So do we have any questions from our folks who have attended today? Any questions? Don't be shy. Don't be shy. So I'm scrolling through the chat to see if there is anything. I'm going to come back to the main room. I don't see any hands up. Let me just scroll through. No, I don't see any hands up. All right. So how about this? Let me see if there are a few other questions that I might ask. And I do have one that I would like to ask, you know, particularly at the start of a lot of um, the problems that we've been seeing, and you know, it goes back, I want to say, to maybe late 2009, where we really started seeing an uptick in violence against Black and Brown folks, which actually kind of coincided with the election of America's first Black president. You know, there were cries or admonishments that, well, if you want to change the system, run for office. And you know, that is one way to do it. But one of the things that happens is when you try to run for office, you know, there's again a system that will do everything in its power to not only tarnish you, but your family. You know, if you got a jaywalking ticket, that somehow becomes a big, you know, thing, and you are now not fit because you jaywalked. Are there, have you seen an increase in the Asian community in terms of running for, you know, local elected offices all the way up through the federal, like starting with community board or district leader, things like that?
I think that we have seen more Asian Americans not just run for office, but win elected office. And something we always want to remind elected officials in New York City, as well as the parties, which is that Asian Americans are actually in New York City are the group with the highest rate of naturalization and the highest rate of registering to vote. Unfortunately, they're also the racial group with the least communications with elected officials and with political parties, because they're not being reached out to about elections. Asian Americans also are the racial group that are most likely to vote across party lines. The only challenge with that in a city like New York, in a state like New York, which is heavily blue, heavily Democrat, is that primaries usually determine who wins the general election in New York. So since our primaries are closed, meaning Democrats vote for Democrats, Republicans vote for Republican primaries, independents don't vote, then that becomes a challenge for us getting the turnout to vote. So there is a lot of voter education that we do with community members, especially since we serve 60,000 a year, and we do a lot of voter education and mobilization. But in terms of Asian American electeds, I know that the borough presidents and local council members are always interested in getting more representation of community boards. We've seen some more get involved in the community education councils, but just this class of council members, of the 39 of the 51 council members, 6 are Asian American, 2 Koreans, 3 Chinese, and 1 South Asian. Oh, sorry, 2 South Asian, 2 Chinese, 2 Korean, sorry. And it's great. 6 are first-time council members representing the Asian American community, all have different ties with the community. We've also seen at the state level where first ever South Asian woman, the first ever, now 2 South Asian men who are state senators get elected. When I first moved to New York City in 2004, we only had John Liu. There was 1 elected official in New York City, council member out of all the hundreds and hundreds of elected officials throughout the entire state of New York. And now we've seen, you know, Grace Meng as our congresswoman. So I think we've seen more and more. And although the new congressional lines and redistricting has confused many people, we know there's a lot of challengers for congressional incumbents and state legislative incumbents coming from not just the AAPI community, but other communities too. I think the key though is it's good to have more representation, but do they have ties to the Asian American community? How knowledgeable are they the needs of the Asian American community? But also, I think that while representation is good, we also need to have existing legislators, regardless of your own ethnic or racial background, understand the needs of your community, especially the fastest growing community in New York. And I think that's where I am heartened that there are legislative officials, Black, Brown, Jewish, others, who are learning more about what's going on in the Asian American community, and they're starting to support legislative and budget priorities of our community.
So with that, I want to say thank you. And let me just scroll through to see if there are any hands raised. So there aren't. So we're going to now transition this part of our program to the breakout sessions. And we will provide you with some question prompts, particularly that look at some of the things that you are doing in your community, some of the things that you need help with, but some question prompts that speak to our topic of conversation today around violence and how we might in community mitigate it, because while public safety is the purview of government, we as community can do things ourselves to help secure our safety.
Thank you, Leslie, and thank you, Wayne, for such a rich and really touching conversation. It is really much needed at the moment, and we hope that we to keep this conversation going. Now we're actually go into our breakout room. I've assigned us into 2 rooms. So in the rooms, we'll be able to get to know each other better, introducing your name, the neighborhood and group that you are representing, the work that you are doing. And also we want to hear what can you get help with and what do you need help with. So now I'll be opening the breakout room. So feel free to join whenever you're ready.
All right. So I think we're all back from our breakout sessions. We will probably have one person. I think there were just 2 breakout rooms. So from the breakout room that I was in, I'm going to ask Sam to give a 3-minute overview of things that can be done that we discussed to help community secure itself. We're going to ask for a representative from the other breakout room to maybe give a 3-minute overview, and then we will move to our closing remarks. So Sam, take it away.
Great. And Dr. Branch, thank you very much. I was sharing with the breakout group. I really appreciate your comments, Mr. Wayne Ho, in terms of what you were sharing with us in terms of the history and learning where those areas that are blind spots for us in both of our communities and where we need to cross-pollinate. When we were talking about public safety, the one thing I wanted to share, and I shared with the group, is that unfortunately, the last 5 administrations, political administrations, mayor administrations have failed and have failed our communities, both the Black, the Brown, the Asian communities drastically because they did not invest in the Black and Brown youth for the last 5 administrations. So if you take and you look, unfortunately, what's going on in our communities now with those youth of color, they're 15, 16, 18, 20, even 30 years old. Well, if you go back 5 years of administration, they were never invested in. No one took the time to invest in them in the after-school programs, the latchkey programs, the mentoring programs, things of that nature. And so unfortunately, the streets and the gangs, the gang life and lifestyle consumed them. So I shared that with them. So that's part of the public safety issue that we have. And the last comment I'll share with you is that today, more than ever, it's glaring and it's blaring. We have more, and this was also brought out, we have more elected officials of color. We now have more Asian officials of color, that are elected officials that are coming on board, which is great. We have more people of color who are elected officials, but yet the quality of life for African Americans and people of color has gone down drastically over the past 5, 10, 15 years. Unfortunately, that's a reality that we need to come to grips with. Why is it the quality of life is deteriorating when you have more representation, not only at the city council level, but the state level as well? So that's something we need to come to grip with in terms of restorative justice, which we were just talking about, and in terms of how we can avoid harm in our community. Those that we've elected have to also participate in not doing harm in the community. You were elected to improve the quality of life, not to help deteriorate it. So I think if that sums it up, Dr. Branch, by all means, please chime in if I left something off the table.
No, I think that was great. It is a very interesting correlation. The more Black and brown electeds and appointeds we have, there is a correlating negative response in terms of investment in community. And so, definitely need to, return those resources, reinvest in communities. So thank you for that.
And I'm sorry. The last comment was, we are Success Community Gardens. We are in East New York. We're in the belly of the beast, but yet, unfortunately, the pandemic allowed us to grow. Good came out of the pandemic for us. Our community came together. We are embracing more seniors are embracing the gardens. We have more youth there as a result of the pandemic that are more trusting now and understand what's going on and understand the value of community. So we're leveraging that to let them know how to live and how to conduct themselves and mentor them in the community so that they respect their neighbors and their elders more. So I just wanted to share that with you too. That's good in terms of what we're doing. And all are welcome to come visit us.
Thank you. And yes, we did, put it out there that if you have a group, we encourage you to visit and, cross support and pollinate. Any representative from the other breakout room that wants to give a quick 2 to 3 minute overview before we wrap up? Okay, so I take the silence as a no.
We were in a group, let's see, it was Nicolina, Stacy, and Vivia. I know Vivia can't chat right now, but no pressure, but Stacy and Nicolina, you're doing pretty good work. Do one of you want to share?
Come on, don't deprive us of, the good jewels that happened in the other room.
Go ahead and share. I am the development manager for 3.5 Acres Yoga. We're a 501c3 nonprofit organization that trains yoga teachers in trauma-informed yoga, meditation, and breathing techniques. We also partner with other nonprofits and organizations, adding our services to their programming. Our services are no cost. We just recently started doing paid programming because funding has been difficult since COVID. And that is the foundation of 3.5 Acres Yoga, ensuring that these services are accessible to all, regardless of age, race, demographic. And Wayne talked a lot about this earlier, ensuring that our communities have access to mental and physical health resources. This is what we're all about. We work with nonprofits such as New Alternatives for LGBTQ youth. We work with Youth Justice Network, which is a nonprofit that aids or provides services to formerly jailed youth. We work with multiple communities, under-resourced and economically disadvantaged communities, ensuring that they have access to these tools and techniques, because research does prove that yoga, meditation, and breathing techniques have a profound impact on cognition, mental and physical wellness. And these are all important in creating a healthy and sustainable lifestyle, and creating better futures for our communities. This is the work that we're doing, and we hope that we can get your support in helping us continue to provide these services.
So thank you for that. And if you've not done so, definitely put your group's information in the chat. So this way we can connect one with another. And thank you very much, everyone. This has certainly been time well spent. A cozy and intimate group we were today for a very timely and needed conversation. Thank you so very much to our featured speaker today, President Wayne and CEO of Asian, hang on a second, let me just get it up in front of me. Excuse me. President and CEO of the Chinese American Planning Council, Inc. Thank you for the wisdom that you have shared. We certainly at Citizens look forward to being a continued partner with you as you put your shoulder to the wheel to improve the lives of the Asian community, but also other communities of color. We also want to thank our funders and our supporters that help to make our grants possible, including the Mollie Parnis Livingston Foundation, Wells Fargo, Booth Ferris Foundation, TD Bank, National Grid Foundation, and all of our generous donors. It is because of you that we are able to do the work that we do. And if you would like to contribute, you can see a complete list of our donors, or to access our grant applications, you can visit us at citizensnyc.org. Again, thank you for spending your afternoon with us and have a great rest of your day.